Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kevin Moss, and I'm a policy advisor here at the Western Governors Association. Welcome to today's webinar on community anchor institution connectivity. This webinar is being held as part of North Dakota Governor Burgum's Reimagining the Rural West initiative. The initiative will examine challenges and opportunities in rural economic and community development with the goal of recommending policy changes and best practices to support vibrant and enduring rural and tribal communities in the West. The initiative has used regional workshops and policy-centric webinars to examine challenges and opportunities across the rural West. You can find the live streams of WJ's previous workshops and webinars under the Initiatives page on our website. A key pillar of Governor Burgum's initiative is connectivity for rural and tribal areas. Digital connectivity and high-speed broadband are the critical infrastructure of the 21st century, supporting economic development, distance learning, and telehealth applications across the country. This initiative will identify strategies and policy opportunities to accelerate the deployment of broadband to rural and tribal areas. Today's speakers are going to discuss how their organizations or agencies support connectivity to schools, libraries, hospitals, and into the communities surrounding those key institutions. They are going to discuss particular federal programs, business partnership models, and policy issues affecting communities' ability to leverage their anchor institutions to the surrounding area. Our panelists will also discuss how anchor institutions can be used to solve broadband connectivity challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic. To begin the conversation, each speaker will provide opening remarks about their organization or agency and the projects they've been involved with. We will then transition to a moderated discussion led by John Windhausen, Executive Director of the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. John will also be incorporating your questions to inform the discussion. To send in questions, please use the chat box function on the left side of the screen and address them to the presenters. You may send in questions at any point, and I will pass them over to John for his use in leading the discussion. I would also like to thank our generous initiative sponsors for supporting today's discussion. These sponsors include Grow with Google, Western Governors University, and Walker Consulting, America's Small Business Development Centers, the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Thank you again for tuning in, and at this point, I'll turn it over to John to get us started. John, take it away when you're ready.
Thank you, Kevin. As he said, this is John Windhausen. I'm the Executive Director of the Shelby Coalition based in Washington, D.C. I want to thank you, Kevin, and the Western Governors Association for allowing us to work with you and putting this really, what we hope is really interesting webinar. For those of you who have not heard of us before, as Kevin said, we are the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition, and our website is shlb.org. We're a nonprofit advocacy organization whose mission is to promote open, affordable, high-quality broadband for anchor institutions and their surrounding communities. So, for instance, we support the E-rate program and the rural healthcare programs administered by the FCC, and we also support state broadband programs that include anchor institutions. As an example of a recent example of our work, we just helped draft a bill in the U.S. Congress that was just introduced by Congresswoman Anna Eshoo and Congressman Don Young that would allocate an additional $2 billion into the FCC's rural healthcare program to address the coronavirus crisis. We're also working on similar legislation to expand the E-rate program so that it would fund broadband connections to the home, because that's where students are these days. So we hope both of these bills will be included in the next coronavirus relief package when Congress comes back into session later this month. But back to our roots, we are broadband advocates, and our little turn of phrase that we use is that we promote deploying broadband to and through community anchor institutions to the surrounding residential and business customers. So we thought it would be helpful to bring together some of the organizations that are actually implementing that strategy so they could share some of their success stories. And we believe the Western Governors Association may want to endorse this approach as a cost-effective way to solve the digital divide and the homework app in rural markets. We have a variety of great speakers today, including from the federal government, the Boulder Valley School District, which has developed a really innovative wireless strategy, and then two fantastic private sector companies that are building these networks, FatBeam and the Education Networks of America, or ENA. So as Kevin said, we encourage people to provide their comments and questions in the chat box that we will do our best to answer right after the formal presentations. So let's get started. We will hear first from Alton Gomorrah, who is a senior loan specialist with the Rural Utility Service Office of Rural Development, and he will discuss the Community Facilities Program. So Alton, take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Appreciate it. So as John said, I'm with Rural Development. We're very focused on rural America, and we have several key programs. They cover utilities, which is what our telecom program is under. We also have housing, business, and community facilities. So I'm with community facilities, and we don't finance broadband or fund broadband, but we do fund and finance the anchor institutions. So we offer direct loans, loan guarantees, and grants. And our goal is to kind of bring the services that urban areas enjoy to the rural areas, so the quality of life can be, equal to that. So that's kind of our goal and mission. So we do primarily healthcare, education, and public safety. About half our portfolio is healthcare. About maybe 20% is education, and about maybe 25% is public safety and public buildings. So to qualify for our program, you have to be a public body, a nonprofit, or Indian tribe, and the project must be in a community of 20,000 or less. We just have a new rule that came out that allows us to go up to 50,000 population just for our guaranteed loans. So the eligible purposes, basically it's just for hard assets, so real estate, buildings, equipment, those types of things, and any associated fees like installation or design cost, engineering, that kind of thing. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. Our overview is really short. It's just to see if you have interest in our program. We handle so many different types of projects that it's best to talk to us if you have something in mind. We can kind of work through that. So please just take this as a kind of a teaser to see if it fits with something you have in mind, and then just please call me to discuss it further. So our direct program is probably our largest focus. Actually, you have to see if you can get a loan from a bank first, because we don't like to steal any loans from our private sector partners. If they can't help you, we can provide the loan guarantee. But if not, then we can also provide you a direct loan with the guaranteed loan or just separately. Our rates are adjusted quarterly. Right now it's 2.375, but once you lock in, it's fixed for the life of the loan. So we can go up to 40 years for the useful life of the asset we're financing, or if there's a limitation on your state statute, then whatever is the least amount of time. One of our biggest requirements is that there's adequate security to protect the government. That just means that value of your collateral has to equal the loan amount. We also are a lender. We are very community-based, but we do require that you show reasonable repayment ability. But we really try and help people. The community component is very important to us. So, we're not really like a bank that's just profit motivated. We really try to see that, we're helping communities grow. Our guaranteed loans, we have some changes there to kind of keep our program well funded. We want to make sure that it pays for itself. And so in our jargon, we call it a negative subsidy rate, which means that whatever we take in covers our costs. And so our fees have been raised. It used to be 1% upfront. Now it's 1.5%. And then we also added a 0.5% annual fee. So again, this would be a guarantee that we provide to your bank to lend you money. Would come with the same kind of requirements. and we provide a 90% guarantee on any loss that the lender may incur. Again, this would be their loan, so it could be fixed or variable. It would be their rules, their collateral, their conditions, and we would just be supporting them with the guarantee. We also have grants. These are much smaller. Our grants normally average about $30,000 each. They can be higher in some cases. We have our regular grants, which are similar to the loan programs. They're also for hard assets, but we recommend that use them for equipment because if you use them for buildings or permanent structures, the servicing may be indefinite because in value. The good news is that we got a whole bunch of disaster funding. So if your county or a county in your state has a presidentially declared disaster area for the past 2 years, you would qualify. Even if your project is not affected by the disaster, you still would qualify. We have $150 million for that. So that is available until expended. That means that our maximum loan, maximum grant amount are higher as long as we have that funding, and that we can do more projects. So if you have projects like that in those kind of areas, please let me know. We also have our Rural Community Development Initiative grant. It's kind of a train the trainer. Unlike our other programs where it's year-round, this one is a defined application period. I think it's open right now, so it probably is too late for this year, but next year it'll come around again. It's very popular. In this case, we can fund salaries, travel, that sort of thing, but it's basically to build the capacity of rural communities. And then our newest grant is the Community Facilities Technical Assistance and Training Grant. This is kind of like for pre-development. So if you're a nonprofit or a public body or Indian tribe and you have a project that you want to develop, but you don't have money up front for the preliminary architectural report or preliminary design, things like that, you could apply for this grant. There's a lot of things in the details for these grants. Don't want to go into them today, but if you have any interest in them, give me a call and we can refer you to the right person or talk about it further. And so here's my contact information. Please feel free to email me and talk further. Thank you. I'll turn it back to John.
All right, thank you very much, Alton. I appreciate that. And especially appreciate your willingness to talk on the phone to potential questioners. So I have some questions, but I'm going to save them for after the other presenters, and then we'll come back to you. But next, we'd like to bring on Andrew Moore, who is the Chief Information Officer for the Boulder Valley School District in Colorado. And as I mentioned briefly, Andrew has developed a very innovative program working with a private company, I believe it's called Livewire, to deliver wireless internet from school buildings to the surrounding residential consumers. And Andrew even has an announcement that came about last night. So the timing of this webinar is really wonderful. And Andrew, we're really very much looking forward to hearing your presentation today. So take it away.
All right, great. Thanks, John. I appreciate it. So first off, Boulder, Colorado. I think most people have heard of us. I'm the CIO for the school district here, 30,000 students that not only serves Boulder, but the surrounding suburbs of Boulder. And so there's 6 different municipalities involved with that. And my job is basically to ensure we have technology in the district. And what I'm going to focus on today is really taking internet to the homes of students using infrastructure the school district has. All right, and let's see, somehow I got bumped out of the mode where I can advance the slide. So maybe if Kevin, you can advance the slide, that would be helpful.
I'll take it to your first slide here and then just prompt me as needed.
Yep, perfect, thank you. All right, so when we looked at the digital divide, we basically break it up into three different areas: the computing devices, broadband at home, and then the skills from the community members to actually be able to use those devices. So I'm going to be focusing on number 2, but just briefly on item number 1, computing devices at home. We have a one-for-one program that is primarily funded by our parents. They're able to pay for Chromebooks over 4 years, so it makes the cost pretty low. It's $45 a year at this point, and then they graduating seniors get to keep their devices when they do graduate. On number 3, which is services for the entire community, we have efforts underway for primarily our low-income developments, where we hold literacy classes on how to even use the computers. This is so that the parents of the students that we're teaching can actually understand what their children are doing. They can get into the Infinite Campus, which is our system that has all the grades and classes and all of that. And so we try to look at the problem of the digital divide, not just through the students, but through the families as well. But as I go forward here, I'm going to be focused on number 2, and that's really the broadband into the homes of our students in need. Next slide. So as we started to really look at this problem 6 years ago and to peel back the onion, we really realized this wasn't about doing the same thing for every student. It was about equity and finding the things that individual students needed when they got home to be connected. And so for some students, they went home, but they went home to internet that was being shared with 4, 5, 6, 7 siblings, and so it was inadequate. And so they just needed a boost with their internet. Other students didn't have any internet at all. And so for them, it was finding ways to get connected, either through programs like Comcast Internet Essentials or through Livewire, which I'll be talking about here in just a minute. All right, next slide. All right, so we attempted numerous different ways to bring internet to those in the most need. We first started out with mobile hotspots, which I imagine many on this call can understand that there is poor cell coverage typically where you actually need the hotspots, simply because the cell phone providers where we're at have not invested in those areas where they don't feel that they can get the sales that they need. And so the hotspots really didn't work well for us, which clearly was a bummer because it's the easiest way to get connectivity into the homes. So we did attempt to run Boulder Valley School District internet right into a housing development. We're fortunate that bond payers funded our private network. So I've got about 100 miles of private fiber that connects all but 2 of our schools. We ran this internet into the housing development, and I was contacted by the FCC about 6 months later, reminding me that if you are getting subsidized internet through the E-rate program, you can't run internet into other facilities without prorating it, or really prorating is the only way to keep it going. And so, long story short, we attempted to get an FCC waiver request. We worked with the University of Colorado at Boulder's law school. They helped us write the request. We submitted it in 2016. It went through the full public process. Lots of support for it. A couple negative comments from the telco industry, and that waiver request is still sitting with the FCC. So they've not ruled on it, but I did have to shut off BVSD internet into that development. I think from a policy perspective, this is something that John has been working on through Shelby, but I think all of us can really bond together and to try to get the rules adjusted so when we do have infrastructure, we can take advantage of it to help students in need. Just so everybody knows, there were about 60 kids connected to that. We didn't actually shut them off. I was able to negotiate another connection that was outside of the E-rate program, outside of Boulder Valley Schools, and we're still feeding that connection into that development today. But the real story here is the third bullet, which is a public-private partnership with a company called Livewire Net. And Livewire does over-the-air broadband. and we just completed a pilot with them. So let's go into the next slide and get into a little more of the details of that. So we are exchanging real estate at our schools for free internet to any student that Livewire can reach. So their technology is basically transmitters in the 3.5 to 5 gigahertz range, FCC approved equipment. That will go out somewhere between 2 to 4 miles in the best case. And so you could think of a school being in a neighborhood, which is a great place to locate these antennas, and then they can generally connect families up to 3.5, 4 miles out. So this is we decided to pilot this in March of 2017. We expanded it to a second school in 18 and then a third school in 19. And we have 50 students connected through that mechanism. Next slide. Oops, we just went to a blank slide. There we go. All right, so how do we actually do this? How do we partner with Livewire? Well, we basically do this through one of two ways. Once their antennas are on our buildings, they can either backhaul them through microwave. That's how the first antenna was hooked up. So it didn't take any of our infrastructure or anything for us to do. But we found that backhauling them on dark fiber that we have to the buildings is a better long-term solution. So the second two are hooked up with one strand of dark fiber that allows them to connect and be able to provide these services. We had some legislative hurdles to get over. In Colorado, there's something known as Senate Bill 152, which says that government agencies using their own broadband infrastructure, fiber in our case, cannot compete with the private sector. So the law says we can't compete with Comcast or CenturyLink. However, there's a provision in the bill that says if you take this to your taxpayers, so the taxpayers of our school district, and they approve the ability to do it, then you can use your infrastructure to provide internet. And so in 2015, our Board of Education authorized that going to the voters, and it passed overwhelmingly to override the provisions in the bill. So that freed us up to be able to move forward. We were recognized in the Congressional's General Accounting Office in a report that was issued last year about how this type of program could be supported through the E-rate program, so that's good. There's been a lot of positive around this public-private partnership. Let's go to the next slide, which is really an update on where we're at today. This slide says next steps, but I want to cross that out and I want to say what we agreed on contractually, because last night, after about 5 years of effort, our Board of Education approved a contract that is district-wide with Livewire. And so that is a formalized 10-year agreement with a 6-year extension possible if both parties want to go past that 10 years. We negotiated a revenue sharing component, so Boulder Valley School District will gain 25% of any revenues generated by the towers on our facilities. The revenue Livewire makes is by selling internet to anybody on the free market, so they compete with Comcast and the CenturyLinks out there. So basically, as this starts to roll out across our 50 plus schools, we'll get another competitor in the internet space in the Boulder Valley. But more importantly, any student that is free and reduced lunch qualified will get free internet. It's going to take, it says here, 18 to 24 months. That was my hope at the time these slides were made. The rollout schedule is actually over 36 months, but we are prioritizing the schools that are closest to our largest populations of free and reduced lunch eligible students. So the bottom line of all that is we'll be able to provide internet to most of our students that do not have it and who are qualified through the FRL program as the months go on. The rollout will start this summer, and we'll have about a third of our schools up and running by the end of this coming school year. All right, I think that's it. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, and I'm easy to find on the internet too, so if anybody wants to reach out directly, just search for Boulder Valley School District CIO and you will find me. Thank you.
That's great, Andrew. Thank you very much. That's very exciting to hear the progress that you made, and the board has approved it, and the county has approved it. So you really are a shining example of what communities can do with showing your initiative. So we've got some questions coming in the chat box, which I'm going to get to after the presentations. But next, we're going to hear from FatBeam. And FatBeam is a really interesting broadband company headquartered in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It's a fiber-based provider offering fiber solutions in Arizona, Idaho, Oregon, Montana, Nevada, Washington, and Wyoming. So it's got quite a strong presence in the western part of the United States. And I can tell from my own personal experience, they've been doing a great job leveraging the E-rate program at the FCC in order to deploy fiber with additional fiber strands that can be used by the rest of the community. So here to tell us about and share some of their case studies and examples of success are Tammy Lange, who's the Vice President of Sales for FatBeam, and she's joined by her colleague Graham Taylor. So Tammy, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the WGA and Shelby for inviting FatBeam to participate in today's call. As John said, my name is Tammy Lange, and joining me is Graham Taylor. Graham is our subject matter expert, all things E-rate. So he works with the school districts across the Western US, as well as libraries, rural healthcare, and government entities. So Graham will be participating and interacting on the call today, sharing his thoughts and expertise on the role that we play in the E-rate libraries and rural healthcare space. So for those of you that are not familiar, FatBeam is an open access provider delivering high-speed bandwidth, connectivity solutions to education, carrier, government, and enterprise customers. We currently have a fiber network that expands into more than 40 cities across 7 states and over 45,000 miles of fiber across the Western US. I've been asked to talk today a little bit about our go-to-market strategy and our focus. FatBeam's focus is on markets that are underserved by traditional carriers and fiber operators, and they're predominantly markets or areas with populations between 5,000 and 150 to 200,000. We, as part of our strategy, we conduct a pretty substantial due diligence before we enter a new market, utilizing an anchor tenant strategy to build out a network, allowing connectivity to neighboring data centers and long-haul networks, which facilitates substantial near-net opportunities. So upon the completion of our build-out, we're able to serve the businesses in the community, as John said. Our FatBeam's anchor client within a new market will typically be a school district where we provide network services under the guidelines of the E-rate program. And once we've delivered the services to the school district, we'll build an additional fiber at our own expense to then expand into the community where we deliver gigabit and above dedicated internet access and dark fiber point-to-points and wide area networks. So this in turn helps us increase the economic development within the community by providing competitive symmetrical broadband access that these communities may have not had access to before. Let me see, do you want to go? I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you next slide. I'm looking at it on a different screen.
Oh, Tim, that's okay.
You can go yet again to the next slide.
Okay.
I'm moving to the next slide by myself and not reminding you to move. Nope, not that one.
One back?
Yeah. There you go. So FatBeam was founded in 2010 by Greg Green and Sean Swanby. When I joined FatBeam nearly 6 years ago, I believe I was employee number 5. Today, we've grown to 34 employees, and as John said, we're headquartered out of our Coeur d'Alene, Idaho market. We are an active member of Shelby in working to be part of the coalition and providing affordable broadband access to the underserved communities. And then I wanted to mention today, because we're in this situation that's really unprecedented with COVID-19, that we're doing our part. We've lifted restrictions on our acceptable use policy. We are working together and have joined the Keep Americans Connected pledge, which means that for a period of time, we're committed to waive late fees and not to terminate services due to financial circumstances associated with COVID-19. So we're just really proud to be a part of, driving broadband accessibility in the Western United States and the markets that we serve. I'm going to let Graham jump in here and talk about some of the case studies that we've conducted with school districts and how having access to high-speed bandwidth has impacted these districts. And I'll also ask Graham to share some of our successes that we've had as well with rural school districts. So if you want to next slide, Kevin, and Graham, if you want to hop in and talk a little bit about our case studies for Sunnyside and Coeur d'Alene School District.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Tammy, Kevin, and John. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on the panel today. As Tammy mentioned, my name is Graham Taylor and been with FatBeam for about 3 years, covering the SLED and government schools and libraries. This particular example that we have up on the screen is a school district located in central Washington called Sunnyside School District. And dating back to, I think it was 2012, back in the T1 era, they had some definite network limitations when it came to connecting their schools and providing proper connectivity for the students and administration. They had put out a bid, which FatBeam responded to, which was an exciting opportunity for us to deploy a dark fiber network for this rural school district. One of the challenges they had was they had a school named Outlook Elementary that was somewhat, I guess you could say, fairly outside the city limits of Sunnyside and always challenged adequate connectivity. And so with this dark fiber network that FatBeam built, it's provided above adequate speeds for them not today, but also into the future. So this was one case study that we like to focus our partnership that we've had with the district for quite some time. And we thought it's relevant for this pamphlet today. The next study that we'd like to focus on is the Coeur d'Alene School District, was where FatBeam is headquartered here. We built out a network. This is a little larger school district, so you're dealing with more 20 plus schools, but they also had some connectivity issues historically. So we built this network, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, a dark fiber network connecting, which allowed them to really improve their connectivity for their student offering. This has been an exciting build for us because what it's also allowed us to do is continue to build to other school districts to the northern Idaho, which is very rural and historically have always been served by wireless providers. So we, over the last couple of years, have been able to build dark fiber networks and lit fiber networks for Pend Oreille School District and Boundary County School District, which are all now completed. And then back on FatBeam's, on our dollar, we've been able to connect these school districts and really give above average connectivity. And so look forward to answering any questions and having more dialogue with the group today. Thank you.
Yeah, and Graham, I just wanted to add one thing. With building our fiber network out in the North Idaho region, we built as far north as we're just bordering on the Canadian border. So we're looking at new opportunities and ways to provide service internationally as well.
Well, that's great, Tammy and Graham. Thank you very much, both. We've got a number of questions coming in for you as well, which we'll get to after our next speaker. But that's really interesting information. So our next is Garry Lowe with the Education Networks of America, or ENA. Garry is the Director of Government Relations West for the company. And ENA is really a fascinating company. I'm particularly interested because they were formed in 1996, the same year that the Telecommunications Act passed Congress to open up the market to competition. And that's exactly what ENA has done. It began with a vision to provide internet access to every K-12 school in Tennessee and created one of the first statewide K-12 networks in the nation. And now it's expanded well beyond that. And ENA now delivers broadband, cloud, security, data analytics solutions to education, library, healthcare, and government organizations nationwide. So Gary's got a great story to tell. I look forward to hearing from you. Garry, take it away.
Thanks a lot, John. As John mentioned, my name is Garry Lowe with ENA, and I handle advocacy and business development for ENA in the Western U.S. as John said, we were one of the first companies in the country to build a state network to connect schools, and this was back when it was, just a T1 line. But we've tried to be good stewards within the states that we operate, and while we are a relatively small company by a lot of telecom standards, I think we have maybe 250 employees, but we're operating in, I think we're up to about 35 states. And the thing that I want, the listeners to kind of remember us by is we try to leverage the best available local assets and provide engineering and financial methods to overcome some of the market barriers and connect those anchor institutions. So I say that, and I commonly use this as a joke. We operate kind of like Switzerland when it comes to the telecom and cable environment. Today, we partner with, I think, about 125 carriers nationwide to serve those anchor institutions and get them back to cost-effective meet points or points of presence to get them the internet access that they need, I should say. And it's everything from, the Nez Perce tribe, their network to, some of the large carriers across the country. So we try to find creative ways to provide the connectivity in markets that are underserved. And I think today we're around 700 districts, and I think it's about 2 million library patrons are served by, one of our services. As John mentioned, 3 years ago, we started, and today we offer services all the way up to analytics and cloud and security for schools, libraries, healthcare. With the COVID circumstances that we're facing, a lot of what we're doing today is to do some of the things that Andrew talked about and increase the mobility for students that are not able to be in school, and help those schools often adjust to this new world of delivering digital education out to their students at their home. E&A is also a Google Premier Partner. We've just joined forces with Google to do their education integration solution initiative, just to make what's happening in the schools or on their network with all the device proliferation that's occurring available to the administrators so they can best serve those students and teachers that are in the field. The one thing I would say that is interesting about this, the COVID circumstances that we're all in with mobility growing, is the increase in security risks associated with this, because schools have and libraries for that matter have helped to build their network and access locally or on premise. Now that they're out in the field more, there's been an increase of attacks, trying to take advantage of the circumstances. So we've spent a lot of time over the last 3 or 4 weeks helping those anchor institutions deal with some of those issues. Generally speaking, in the West, we have pockets of good connectivity and pockets that need more. And from a policymaker standpoint, I know we're going to have some of those on the phone. I think the thing that we always try to tell anchor institutions or state policy leaders is, when you're looking at ways to solve this problem, be relatively agnostic to the different technologies that exist in the market, and be relatively agnostic to the different providers that could exist in the market. Some of our best successes have been in partnership with electrical co-ops. We can talk more about that when we get to some of the questions, but a lot of those power providers often have a network to manage their smart grid, but may not be equipped to the degree that the market would desire to deliver some of those services to their anchor institutions. And so we've often helped them both with engineering expertise and financial support to, pivot a little bit and offer more of those services to those that need that level of connectivity. I just want to say thanks to John and Kevin and Governor Burgum for the initiative that WGA is doing. I think having the more collaboration amongst the different associations that are working to solve some of these problems, and more transparency across the states or the counties or the cities to help overcome some of the limitations in the rural markets, I think is a good thing. And I think with that, Kevin and John, I can proceed to the next part of the presentation.
All right. Well, that's great, Garry. Thank you very much. And I want to come back to you as well with some more specific and ask you about some more specific case studies or examples. But let me first start by going back to our first speaker, Alton Gomorrah with the Rural Utility Service. Alton, I wonder if I could ask you a few questions about the Community Facilities Program. I wonder, for instance, could you tell us how much money is awarded by through that program each year? And then also I'd like to know, how does an applicant, if they're applying for loan money, how do they convince you and RUS that they can pay back that loan? Usually when you're lending money to a private sector company, you're going to invest it in new services, or and then you develop revenue off of those facilities that you build. But when you're building schools and libraries and health providers, they may not be able to generate that kind of revenue. So if you could answer a couple of those questions, that would be great.
Okay. I'll do my best. So this year in available funding, we have $2.8 billion in our CF Direct program. We have about $500 million in the CF Guaranteed. The grants are usually, like I said, pretty small, so probably under $50 million. But the big news, as I mentioned, was that we have that $150 million in disaster relief grant fund. Last year, we only obligated about $750 million in direct loans and only about $75 million in guaranteed loans. So, our staff is shrinking like everybody else, and so it's been hard to get out the money, but we have lots of money available. So welcome everybody to come in and talk to us. As far as the repayment, that's a great question. We do so many different types of projects that it's really case by case. But a lot of times, if it's something that's not revenue generating on its own, we look to some kind of other repayment source like tax collections or a general obligation bond, something like that.
I see. So that's very interesting that you have money available. And so you're actually looking for interested applicants to apply for that funding.
Yes, for sure. We need lots more applicants coming in.
Well, that's good news to potential applicants. Is there a particular reason you think why you've not had enough applicants seeking that funding?
I think it's just capacity. Maybe 2011 we had $300 million in CF Direct loan funds, and since then our staff has shrunk, but our available funding has grown, to 10 times what it was. So just a simple math tells you that it's hard for us to keep up. We've been doing much larger projects. We can do stuff as small as $25,000 for a loan, but we've also done loans well over $100 million each. So I think it's just not having enough staff out there. But like I said, we're wide open for applications.
Interesting. And if I could ask, how long does it take to get approved from the time an application is submitted?
That's another question that's really hard to answer. It really depends on the complexity of your request, and then also the state. I'm from Hawaii, and right now I'm going to go back there As the program director, again, half the staff has vacancies, so they're working at 50% capacity. And so, of course, that slows down the process. I think, if you have a fully staffed state that has experienced people, 6 months to a year for something straightforward, can be longer if it's more complex or if there's delays caused by whatever reason, because, if that's we deal with construction a lot, there's often delays. So it really depends. If someone has a project and a deadline, if they want me, I can kind of walk them through the process and give them a more specific answer.
Okay, but just roughly, are these the kind of applications that you can get out the door in 1 month, or does it usually take 6 months or a year?
Yeah, usually much longer, because oftentimes it involves real estate, and it involves many times construction, which could take a couple of years. So it's not unusual for a project to take a few years to close because of construction, because of the design and approval process. But I think 6 months would be like as fast as it could go for something with real estate involved.
Gotcha. Okay, I just wanted to get a sense, but that's very helpful. So thank you for that. I'll come back to you again, but Andrew Moore, I'd like to bring you back in the conversation here, and I have a couple of questions for you, and then there may be some others coming in through the chat feature. But you mentioned very briefly, I know you put that slide 1, 2, and 3, and the number 1 was focused on devices. And I just wanted to ask you a quick question when you said $45 per year for devices. I didn't quite understand what you meant by that.
Yeah, happy to clarify that, John. So we basically take the cost of a Chromebook and split it over 4 years, and then we have a fee that we charge parents. So the easiest way to think about this is in high school, 9th through 12th grade, the incoming freshmen get a brand new Chromebook. Their parents are charged a fee, which is $45. And then the next year, sophomore, there'll be another $45 fee. And so by the time they graduate, they paid for the Chromebook, and then they can take it with them when they leave. It's turned out to be just a wonderful way to get Chromebooks in the majority of our secondary students. So we have that program for both middle schools and high schools, and it's worked out well for us.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for explaining that. That does make a lot of sense. And I see you said in the chat that you have the filtering embedded into the device that you hand out. Is that right?
That's correct. We use a product called GoGuardian, and it seems to work well for us. There's a number of products out there that my peers are using, so I'm not here endorsing a product per se. But when you put the filtering on the device itself, then we're compliant. And it doesn't matter what internet the student is connected to, whether it's at grandma's house, it's at McDonald's, it's at their home, it's on the district network, they are filtered appropriately.
Gotcha. And one practical question about giving access to Livewire to install the antennas on the school building. Were you at all concerned about their access to the rooftops of the buildings and whether there could be any damage to the structure of the building by deploying these antennas?
Yeah, great question. So this has really been a partnership inside of Boulder Valley School District as well. So my peer who runs the facilities side, he has an electrician that accompanies Livewire, and then also a person that is responsible for the physical building, the roof. And then they work together to find the right way to get the fiber up there, to get the power up there, so that we don't have damage, we don't have water leaks, all those things that can occur through that process. So we look at Livewire as another subcontractor, in all honesty, that would be doing any work at our buildings.
Right, gotcha. So you build in that protection and that safety comes with the installation.
Exactly.
And what if, is this an exclusive contract you have with Livewire? Or what if another company came to you and said, hey, you're a public institution, we ought to have the same access to your rooftops as you're giving Livewire? Would you be open to that?
Yeah, great question, because that was one of the negotiating points that we went through. So it is an exclusive agreement for the first 5 years, and then it is open. And part of that debate, discussion, as we were trying to settle on what that should be, was around the fact that we don't want the signals to get conflicting with each other, right? So the more providers you have, you've got to watch out for what frequencies they're using. And second, there's a capital cost that Livewire is going to have to take on. And we wanted to, support them. If this wasn't a win-win, they weren't going to be, up for signing the contract. And so we agreed on the 5 years as well for them to be able to recoup their capital costs. But after that 5 years, then we're free to negotiate with anybody on that structure. And by the way, the 5 year exclusivity is really just for us to go to Livewire and have the conversation, and they can basically say, you know what, this is too close to us, it conflicts. Or they could say, you know what, it's okay, and then we can negotiate that and move forward. But I think big picture, 5 years.
Gotcha. Okay. And then since you mentioned spectrum, do you happen to know what spectrum Livewire is using to transmit the service? Because we've had some experience with libraries using unlicensed TV white spaces spectrum. So I'm curious.
Yeah, it is not the TV white space spectrum. It's between 3.5 and 5 gigahertz. I don't have the detailed specs in front of me, but I could certainly get those through Livewire.
Okay, well, that sounds like that might be the CBRS spectrum then. That's interesting. The FCC's been making that spectrum available at 3.5 gigahertz over the last couple of years.
It is, John, because that is written into the contract. I just am not as clear on the technical details of it, but that's exactly what it is.
Oh, great. Very good. Okay. Well, good. Thank you for that, Andrew. Back to Tammy and Graham with FatBeam. Tammy, you mentioned very briefly that you are running an open access network, and I wanted to ask you if you could say a little bit more about that, because of course that's very fundamental to the Shelby to and through strategy, is that these facilities are open and accessible and can be shared. So can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by open access and maybe explain what dark fiber is, how that plays into it?
Yeah, absolutely, John. So we are an open access provider. So I guess in summary, what that really means is we work with other carriers, both incumbents and regional carriers. We allow them to utilize our fiber network through a lease or a long-term IRU, which is something usually beyond 10 years. And we partner with other carriers and regional providers because we don't do long haul between markets. We focus on the metro and last mile. So those partnerships are important to deliver services in and out of the markets. That's a little bit about the open access network. What was the second part of your question, John?
The dark fiber.
So when we deliver our fiber to anchor institutions, typically we're responding to bids that are requesting lit or dark fiber. So we'll provide both those options, either under a lease or under a special construction option through USAC. And what we do that's a little bit different maybe than what other providers do is if it's a lit service that a school district is providing, we give them the scalability and the option to convert to dark fiber at any time. Of course, they'd have to do the proper processes and filings with USAC to do that, but we allow them to do that at no additional cost. So in essence, it gives them a scalable, unleashed accessibility to speed. The difference between lit fiber and dark fiber is lit fiber is governed in terms of speeds by the electronics. Dark fiber is where we hand it off, and an anchor tenant or school district will use their own routers and switching gear to set the speed. So if they have gear that allows 10 gig, up to speeds up to 10 gig, then that's their limitation. It's only limited by the electronics on the other end of it. It's just a pipe, and it comes to life when you add electronics, and that electronics controls the speeds. So we don't have any caps or restrictions on our speeds when we hand them off. It's typically either they're asking for a certain speed in a lit service, or they're managing it on their own end to whatever their district is geared up to serve.
I
Do you
gotcha.
have
And I want to.
And Tammy, just to build on that, this is Graham speaking from FatBeam. As an open access provider, a lot of times in these rural communities that we build out fiber plant, we'll backhaul the wireless providers to other WISPs, to other local providers to enhance greater connectivity for them as they pass those services on to residents and residential.
That's very good. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I was just going to call attention to that dimension, Graham, because I remember when Greg Green and I had some meetings. Greg Green, your FatBeam CEO, was in DC about a year and a half ago. We had some meetings with the FCC. He talked about how FatBeam builds fiber to the schools, but the school system may only use some of the fiber strands, and that the other fiber strands you lease out to commercial customers, and that's what makes the fiber build economic. Because, in other words, if you don't mind me using shorthand, you can't make enough money just by serving the schools, but if you can serve the schools plus additional commercial traffic, that's what makes it economically viable. Did I get that right? And are you doing that in a lot of different markets?
Yeah, I think that's right, but I just want to make one clarification on that, John. What we build for the schools, we provide them their own dedicated fiber. We don't use any of the fiber that we're building out for the schools. We add additional fiber strands. We're typically pretty fiber rich in the markets that we serve. So we have a lot of extra strands that we drop in when we're building out the school network, but we don't share those. Those are dedicated, symmetrical services that we deliver to the school. So I just wanted to clarify that. It sounded like we were sharing the fibers with the school.
That's a good clarification. So the fiber cable may have, what, 98 fiber strands in it? And so,
typically we're dropping 144 strands in a market.
Okay, and some of those fiber strands are dedicated to the schools.
Absolutely.
And that are not shared, but then other fiber strands in that same cable may be used for other purposes.
Right, and we're taking on the expense of adding extra fiber in there outside of what the school request is in order to serve the communities. So it's at our own expense.
Gotcha. And is that true in all 40 markets in which FatBeam operates today?
Yeah, it is. That's kind of what our strategy is. We oftentimes, have a very low or no margin on building out for the districts, but if it's a market that can become a core market and we can deliver our fiber out to the business community, then that's how we're able to offset and have it be a really competitive service for the school district.
Excellent. And how do you choose which markets you go into? Do you just bid in the E-rate process, and then where you win the bid, then you build to meet that bid, or are you targeting cities outside of the E-rate process?
So I can take that one, Tammy. John, it's a combination of both. I mean, a lot of times as FatBeam, we look to tier 3, tier 4, more rural markets where there's really not a lot of options for the people and for the population. So, like Tammy mentioned, we'll come in and we'll build the network, and then we'll provide additional capacity to the city, to the government, to the municipalities, as well as commercial businesses within those communities. So it's kind of both through the E-rate program and then through other anchor tenants, but it's a very successful implementation, and it really provides great alternative options to these communities that are lacking other providers to make an ROI to come in and provide connectivity.
Well, that's really great, because then you're bringing a high quality service to markets that might not get it from anyone else. So that's really important especially for these rural areas. Thank you for clarifying that. Let me shift over to E&A and back to Garry Lowe. Garry, I haven't kept up. I didn't realize you were in 35 markets now. I remember a few years ago when E&A was in 10 to 12 markets, or 10 to 12 states, now 35 states. That's very impressive. And I wonder if you could talk about, this is a bit of an open-ended question, but I see some of the incumbent telcos are filing for bankruptcy. And yet, at the same time that E&A seems to be going great guns and expanding into a lot of these markets. So what's the secret to your success? Why is E&A able to be expanding and profitable when some of the other phone companies are declining?
It's a good question, John. I think it's a lot of things, honestly. Much like FatBeam is using a variety of methodologies to serve the rural markets, we use a variety of services to serve our anchor institutions. Especially up in the Northwest, where you have a strong presence of a company that's going out of business, I think for us, it's been focused on the people that we serve more than trying to be everything to everybody. And knowing our limitations is what's kept us successful, over the years. I think as we began to serve schools years ago, or libraries years ago, and now healthcare facilities, we try to pivot with their new needs and accommodate and adapt to their new environment. And like I said, in the early days, we were doing T1s, and that was a new technology. And then we migrated to wireless, and now it's largely dark fiber because of its postalized cost and scalability, as Tammy and Graham had referenced earlier. I think more importantly, as the learning environment has changed, we've tried to change with it as well. And I think that's what's brought us to so many other markets. Every state has a demand for broadband, but a lot of the challenges that exist in the market are really about coming up with ways to overcome the limits of any geography. And so for us, when we find those communities that are in need of help, we go to where they are and we learn what they need, and we try to bring the best contributors to it. Over the last handful of years, we've been working in the California market as part of K-12 HSN and the CNIC network to serve those rural parts of California. So as we've went there, we've learned new things and just tried to find where we fit. And because we've taken a relatively agnostic approach to the technologies and the services that our anchor institutions need, it's brought us into a lot of places. But I think generally speaking, we've stayed very focused on the customer that we are well aligned with, and I think that's what's brought us to so many places.
So you work with a lot of these incumbent phone companies too in deploying service, right?
Yes.
And so I guess I'm just wondering, Garry, how you manage that if some of these underlying companies are having financial trouble. Does that limit your E&A's ability to expand its service?
I mean, it can, I guess. We're not in a situation where that's an issue today. And when we use local carriers to deliver connectivity, we're bringing them back to one of our 16 POPs we have a long haul network across the country. And so we're leveraging a component of their network, not the whole connectivity that they would provide themselves. And what that does for us is it helps us keep the carrier community honest, because if we find that they're not serving the schools or serving us to the degree that we need, we have the ability to pivot and go find another provider that can deliver that service. And so I guess from the perspective of companies that might be having financial troubles today, we've always allowed ourselves some flexibility to deviate to different local carriers as best as we can, and up to this time, it hasn't really been an issue.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned earlier that you work with electric co-ops, and so that provides you an additional entree into a market, different partnership options.
Yeah, and I think the tribes, the co-ops, even municipalities. I know, like in Andrew's market, there's a variety of towns that are relatively underserved with high demands for connectivity, and they've created unique models for their communities. We offer services even in those cases as well. So we just try to be agnostic to those assets in any market and leverage them as best we can.
Well, it's working. I congratulate you on your growth. Let me ask you about one other aspect of your growth. You've recently, or I guess a year or two ago, acquired a healthcare company or a healthcare broadband provider called Telequality. And I wonder if you can speak to how that has changed the ENA business plan, if at all. Like, are you finding that there are efficiencies in building a single network to serve not just the schools and libraries through E-rate, but also to serve the telehealth community through the FCC's rural healthcare program?
I think, both of the programs that supply revenue offsets to those anchor institutions are similar. So from our perspective, that was a natural migration. Schools are the largest networks in any town, sans a data center or, a carrier, right? Rural healthcare is a little bit, their needs are a little different, their abilities are a little different, and so we were pretty well adjusted already, because even prior to that, acquisition, we had some familiarity with it. I would say, generally speaking, they're pretty much the same. There's just a little bit of nuance to each of their environments that require us to deliver services slightly different. But for the most part, it created some synergy in markets that we already were, and it gave us access to, more anchored tenants or anchor institutions that needed help that we could provide.
Very interesting. Yep. Well, I think that goes to the Shelby Coalition's point of view that it's really cost effective to aggregate these anchor institutions onto a shared network. That way it reduces the costs for everybody. And ENA is kind of the living, breathing example of that. FatBeam as well, that you're building networks with economies of scale if you can bring on all the anchor institutions. And I think that's one of the things that we're working on at the federal policy level is currently the programs are a little bit ossified or structured, or they don't allow a lot of cross-pollination between the E-rate program and the rural healthcare program, and so they're stuck in these silos. And we're trying to break down those silos so that the money flows, in a more economically efficient way to these kind of shared networks. So I support exactly what you're trying to do. Let's say back to Alton at RUS. I wonder, Alton, if we could just mention briefly, how does your office work with the other broadband offices and broadband programs that the Rural Utility Service is currently offering?
I guess because we try not to overlap, we don't really, have much involvement in broadband. We normally work with the general field representatives who handle the program, and we can coordinate introductions and connections to them. That would probably be the best way we could help.
Okay, and can people just call you directly if they would like more information about either your programs or who else they can talk to at RUS?
Sure. Anybody can call me about anything related to RD. I'll help them directly or refer them to someone who can. Be glad to do that.
Okay. Would you like to share your phone number with them on this webinar, or rather have them just email to you?
No, I can share. I apologize for not putting on the last slide. My number is area code 202-705-3303.
Very good. Thank you for that. So what I'd like to do as we are moving towards the end is ask the remaining three speakers the same question. So if you had recommendations for the Western Governors Association or Western governors themselves about what kind of changes they should consider making in order to speed the deployment of broadband to these rural states, what would they be? What would you suggest, and how would you? The obvious thing to suggest is to make more funding available, and the Shelby Coalition is certainly working on that. But even outside of funding, are there things that the Western governors can do that are going to attract more broadband investments to their markets to help solve this digital divide? So Andrew, you're not a provider, you're a school district, obviously, but are there lessons that other school districts can learn from the work that you've done, or that policymakers could learn from your experience in promoting this wireless service? So Andrew, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Tammy and Garry.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think two things come to mind. First off, was one of the first hurdles that I ran into was the Colorado law that prevents government entities to provide internet to anybody other than the school district itself. And that law is put in place for the private sector, which I totally get, but it's a barrier. And we've seen municipality after municipality now in the state of Colorado take it to the voters, and the voters have overwhelmingly started to approve the overrides. Longmont is a city just north of us, and they now have gig fiber up and down for $50 a month. And that's an incredible service for all of their residents. So I guess my first message is don't pass laws that restrict the ability to use assets to get internet, especially internet to those kids in need. And then second is the E-rate provisions. I totally understand why they're in place, but whatever we can do to band together, when the intent of getting internet into places using E-rated facilities is to help students in need, it seems to me we've got to find ways to get those laws adjusted so that we can actually serve those in need.
Well, that's a very good point, Andrew. And if the audience doesn't mind me making a bit of a plug here, we just posted a blog on the shelby.org website, which talks about that very thing, about the E-rate restrictions really should be lifted, especially during this time of emergency, but perhaps ongoing afterwards as well, because we've got very high capacity networks that are being built to serve the schools and libraries and healthcare providers. And a lot of that capacity is dormant when the schools or libraries are closed, or the health facilities demand declines. But they need that capacity right now. But schools and libraries have a lot of capacity running to those school and libraries buildings that aren't using them today. So it would be great if the E-rate rules could be loosened up to leverage that network investment. After all, I think our position is a lot of these networks are being built with public money. That's the E-rate program, and the rural healthcare program collects money from all telecom consumers. So it's public money that's being used to fund them. So those networks should be shared with the general public, and the public should benefit from those networks. So I appreciate you calling attention to that policy change, and that's something that our Shelby Coalition is going to keep working on.
Hey, John, one other point along that I think is pertinent here. If Boulder Valley School Districts had paid for its fiber network using E-rate Category 2, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing. We did not pay for it through that mechanism. We paid for it via a bond. And so the fiber infrastructure is not under the rules of the E-rate program. So anyway, I think that's a key point, because if school districts are using E-rate to build their fiber networks, they're going to run into the same problem I ran into when we ran internet into that housing development, and that's the FCC waiver request that has been pending for a number of years.
Well, that's a very key point. You're right. And you tried to ask the FCC to change their rule. The FCC didn't uh, do anything with your petition, so you have found another way to do it. Which bully for you. You're creative and you're innovative and you got it done. But for a lot of other schools, they may not be able to have the same ability to bypass E-rate. They're kind of stuck with E-rate. So you really filed that petition not so much for yourself, but on behalf of all the other school districts that would benefit from the rule change that you requested.
Yep.
So thank you for doing that. And we're going to continue to try to work on that with you. So next, Tammy, would you like to offer a few thoughts, and Graham as well, about what policymakers and Western governors should do in order to promote greater broadband investment in their rural communities?
Yeah, John, I'll tackle one, and I thank you, Andrew, for sharing those things. I do agree that while the E-rate program provides great options in a time like today, it's trying to figure out how that might be they might be able to provide alternative options to residents. And so, but one point I wanted to talk about, John, was regarding regulatory challenges that we face when we enter new markets, whether it be state land or franchise agreements. It oftentimes seems like cities or counties are reinventing the wheel when you have a new provider coming in. So any sort of advocacy or changes to the demographics via the Western Governors Association or Shelby or any other advocacy groups would be very much appreciated. I know as we enter different markets, we've come into some significant time challenges, as other providers do. And so any emphasis towards that would be great.
And just to layer on, John, maybe, and I don't know if this is on the governor level or not, but grant options to build out fiber in rural communities. And I also voice that if we could get more lift on restrictions on the anchor tenant assets to provide internet to the communities that have access to that, I think that would be helpful. And then, just more funding availability.
So Tammy, could I ask you to clarify just what you meant by just before the funding opportunity point? What kind of restrictions on grants would you like to see opened up?
Not restrictions on grants. It was restrictions on the assets that the anchor tenants currently have that might be served via E-rate to provide that internet and those services to the communities.
Okay, gotcha. Right. So I know some states, for instance, they kind of piggyback off of the FCC's E-rate policies, and they adopt their own state universal service funds that sometimes mirror the FCC regulations. So it would make sense for the states to perhaps be a little bit more creative than the FCC has been when they're adopting their own universal service programs at the state level. And they might find more funding and more investment in those states if they were to loosen up some of those rules.
Agreed.
Good deal. Garry, what would you suggest to Western governors?
Well, I have a couple, and they're a little bit of an echoing of what Andrew, Tammy, and Graham have referenced. So clearly we all are wrestling with it. But I have a saying that I use once in a while, and sometimes it's controversial, but regulations typically stand to benefit the regulated over time. And when you're an innovator like we are coming into a new market, much like FatBeam is, or for Andrew's sake, much like he's trying to deviate from standard practices, there's hurdles that we have to overcome. And I think if I could tell the Western governors, I would challenge them to look at those regulations that limit growth in connectivity, whether it's permitting or franchise agreements or some of the other rules that limit our ability to enter into a market. WGA, I have the bumper sticker on my beer fridge. Bipartisanship happens, and often it takes a lot of work. And I know that Jim and Kevin and the guys are bringing a lot of different voices from a lot of different states that don't always agree, and they work really, really hard to come up with common ground that can move the needle on the things that challenge the West, right? And that should be echoed and adopted across a lot of other government entities. The other thing I would say to the WGA members is, Colorado actually about a couple, 3 years ago, maybe it was 4, developed a broadband office, right? And a lot of states have done some of that. But one of the things they did very simply, it's really not a heavy lift. It was just, let's get the Department of Transportation that has assets across the state, right, to make that visible to the carriers so that they can have access to meet points and assets that would get them over a mountain or get them across the plains. And that cultural change at Colorado, I thought was, was a great way to approach it. That happened under Hickenlooper's tenure. But to me, that's where all states have to change, is they've got to break down the silos of the assets that are in the market that could be leveraged to some degree by, a private provider or, another entity to serve those anchor institutions. And just breaking down some of the regulatory barriers and the political and cultural norms that agencies operate under can often foster a lot of collaboration within the market to serve those areas that are underserved.
Well, that's a good point. There are a lot more players in the marketplace now than when a lot of those rules were first adopted. Some of these rules are 20, 30, 40 years old when the marketplace was very different. So you've got competitive providers like FatBeam and ENA. You've got a lot of wireless providers and WISPs. The rules need to be adjusted so that we can take advantage of these new opportunities being provided by these newer technologies.
Absolutely.
Let me go back to Tammy and Garry with one last question, which I apologize for not sharing with you in advance. So if you don't have a view, that's totally fine. But, when you ask the FCC what they are doing to promote broadband in rural America, they point to this Rural Digital Opportunities Fund, the RDOF, where the FCC is going to embark on a process of awarding funding. I think it's $20 billion over 10 years and running through a reverse auction process to bid down the level of the subsidies that would be necessary. But the FCC believes that that's going to solve the problem in rural America. FCC is proposing 20 billion, but I've also seen a study from the Fiber Broadband Association that suggests it's really going to cost more like 70 to 80 billion dollars to get broadband to all of rural America. So what do you think about the FCC's RDOF? Is that really going to solve the rural problem or not? Tammy and Graham, do you have a view?
I was going to let Tammy answer that first.
I think it's a good step in the right direction, John. I think it'll be interesting to see as they try to come up with a specific number. I like the fact that it's become a priority, and I think this pandemic has shifted focus there. So I think it'll be very interesting to see as things proceed how they derive the specific number. But yeah, I would err on the higher side there, knowing what it does cost to build out networks in our country.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that, and do we have the details of how they arrived at the $20 billion number?
I don't think we do. No, I think that it's an estimate by the FCC. And of course, the actual number is going to be determined by the reverse auction itself. Right. So it could be less or more depending on how the auction goes.
Yeah. So I would err, as Graham said, on the higher side. I just definitely would, because I don't know how that number was derived and if it's just a shot in the dark or not.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, I believe this is true, that is just for the price cap companies. So that, which, the larger companies like AT&T's and Verizon, but does not include the area served by a lot of the small telcos. So those are not going to be subject to the RDOF auction. So there's another big swath of territory that the local telcos serve that the RDOF is not going to address those needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Garry, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm trying to be the positive contrarian a little bit. I actually think, the FCC has done a really good job with E-rate and getting access. I think, as you know, and why we rely on you so much, John, is to be the voice and advocate to make the tweaks and the changes that are going to benefit the market. Technology and telecommunications deflationary. So the price does go down over time, and while I think Graham and Tammy are probably right that the higher dollar amount is more likely than less likely, I think it's a good starting point. And then Western governors, Shelby, Cozen, CETA, all the entities that have a strong influence over the anchor communities that we serve can help to guide the effectiveness of that program to see how close or far we are to actually achieving the goal.
Great, good deal. Well, thank you all. This is a time that unfortunately we have to bring this webinar to a close, but this has been a fascinating discussion. I wish we had more time to continue it. But we hope you've enjoyed these examples of the Shelby Coalition's to and through strategy for broadband deployment, which we think can benefit rural communities in particular because of the economics are so difficult in rural America. So we're going to be talking to members of Congress about these ideas as Congress considers new broadband infrastructure legislation in the coming weeks. I invite you to keep in touch with us. You can learn more about the Shelby Coalition on our website, shlb.org, and that's where you can sign up for our news updates, our press releases, or connect with us on Twitter at Shelby Coalition. So Kevin, again, thank you so much for hosting this webinar and allowing us to participate. It's been a great conversation, and I'll turn things back over to you, Kevin.
Great, thanks, John. I agree. I think it's been a really strong conversation. I think at the end, particularly, we really got into, what are some of the unique challenges in the West related to topography and terrain and differing ownership patterns and that sort of thing, and how governors can be useful in that space. So that was really valuable input for us. I do want to flag for folks that tomorrow at 11 a.m., WGA will be hosting a webinar on reimagining disability employment policy with the State Exchange on Employment and Disability. And so that could be interesting for folks. So see the chat box for the registration link there. And then recently, through the initiative in the broadband space, we've hosted webinars on electric and telephone cooperatives and how they're launching broadband networks across the West. And then also, we hosted a discussion with tribal leaders about how some of the challenges that they face in terms of launching networks and accessing spectrum and those sorts of things. So if folks are curious about those topics, you can find those webinars archived on WGA's website. And with that, I want to, John, thank you again, and thank all of our panelists and all of our listeners today. We really appreciate you tuning in and hope that you have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.